Marriage. Is it a contract or a covenant? To answer this question, let us first define the term marriage. Marriage is an agreement between two consenting adults or a mutual asset. It is a negotiation where the vows spell out the terms and often has a required waiting time. A license is issued by the government that must be signed, sealed, and delivered for the legality of the marriage. Moreover, this affirms the legal binding of the couple, granting them certain rights, privileges, and status. Going back to the first question, we must define marriage as a contract. We are in a contract-oriented society, and with contracts, you can be more certain that a person or company will live up to their claims. Many Christian couples take this contract mentality into their marriages. Unfortunately, this kind of marriage stimulates resentment, hurt, and anger, and eventually leads some couples to divorce. Basically, a contract is an agreement between two or more people signifying that all signing parties will do something. Legally, marriage is a contract with certain rights and responsibilities, but we must distinguish between legal marriage and covenant marriage. In a legal marriage, if one party doesn't live up to the contracts, then legal actions force him or her to do so, or to end the marriage with an equitable settlement. A society couldn't exist without laws regulating marriage relationships. So in that sense, marriage is a contract. However, for a Christian, marriage is more than this. It is also a covenant.
A covenant is like a contract. It is an agreement between two or more persons, but the nature of the agreement is different. The biblical pattern reveals 5 characteristics of covenants. First is that covenants are initiated for the benefit of the other person. Many of us can honestly say that we entered marriage motivated by the deep desire to benefit the person we were about to marry. Our intention was to make them happy. However, when needs aren't met, spouses can revert to a contract mentality. Second, in covenant relationships, people make unconditional promises. Covenant marriages are characterized by unconditional promises, such as those spoken in traditional wedding vows. Third, covenant relationships are based on steadfast love. In a marriage, steadfast love refuses to focus on the negative aspects of one's spouse. Steadfast love is a choice. Fourth, covenant relationships view commitments as permanent. Unquestionably, the biblical ideal is one man and one woman married to each other for life. As Christians, we must not lower the ideal. This standard can only be attained if we practice the 5th characteristic of the covenants. Lastly, covenant relationships require confrontation and forgiveness. These 2 responses are essential in a covenant marriage. Confrontation means holding the other person responsible for his or her actions. Forgiving means a willingness to lift the penalty and continue a loving, growing relationship. Ignoring the failures of your spouse isn't the road to a marital growth. A covenant marriage is God's plan. There may be contracts within the framework of covenant marriage, but for the Christian, marriage is a covenant. God's best in marriage will never be accomplished without His power.
So what is the difference between a contract and a covenant? The difference is one word, and it is God. A marriage covenant is from God. He is the source of the covenant. A human contract is essentially 2 people agreeing to provide something for one another. A divine covenant is 2 people responding to what God has already provided. In Matthew 19 verse 6, it says there, Jesus goes back and roots marriage in creation and then talks about our very active role. The man and woman living and cleaving become one flesh. Then he ends with, what therefore God has joined together, let none man separate. Secondly, a marriage covenant is through God. He is the means of the covenant. A marriage covenant is an acknowledgement that God is not only the source of the marriage, but is the means of the marriage. Lastly, a marriage covenant is to God. He is the goal of the covenant. Marriage does not start with us, depend on us, or point to us. In Matthew 22, Jesus warns some religious leaders who were trying to make marriage eternal. He said, "You are wrong, because you know neither the scriptures nor the power of God." He went on to explain that marriage is not eternal, but God is. We must keep our eyes on the point of marriage. We worship God, not His gifts. So, in a very real way, a marriage covenant both protects us from trivializing marriage and from idolizing marriage. It puts marriage in its proper place because God is the source. He is the means and He is the goal. It is from, through, and to God.
While a contract is legally binding, a covenant is a spiritual agreement. A contract is an agreement between parties, while a covenant is a pledge. A contract is an agreement you can break, while a covenant is a perpetual promise. You seal a covenant while you sign a contract. A contract is mutually beneficial relationship, while a covenant is something you fulfill. A contract exchanges one good for another, while a covenant is giving oneself to the other. You can opt out of a contract, while a covenant is about having the strength to hold up your part of the promise. One can stop paying in a contract when one party is not fulfilling their part in a deal. However, in a covenant, the party not getting their needs may support the failing party so that they can meet their obligations. Overall, a covenant is a better way to build relationships in both business and in life. In a contract, if a person does not fulfill his obligation, then it gives the other party to back out as well. The same is not true in a covenant. You must hold up your promise even if others do not hold up their pledge.